I think the Stoic response to this is to say, well, your agency is in changing your character over time. Your agency is in directing yourself in the path of self-improvement. But in any situation, you're only ever as good as you are.
Welcome to Stoic Conversations. My name is Caleb Monteveros.
And I'm Michael Tremblay.
And today we're going to be going through a select passage from the Handbook. Do you want to kick this off, Michael?
Yeah. We're going to be talking about Handbook 42. The Handbook is a short book by Epictetus, kind of like his greatest hits. It was meant to be carried around in your pocket or carried on your body, something you could turn to remember throughout the day. Lots of great passages from the Handbook, and we'll focus on this one today. And so without any delay, I'll just kick things off and we'll dive into it.
Awesome.
So this is Epictetus' Handbook, part 42. Epictetus says, when someone acts badly towards you or speaks badly of you, remember that he is acting or speaking in that way because he thinks that is appropriate for him to do so. Now, it's not possible that he should follow what appears good to you, but rather what appears so to him. So that if he judges wrongly, he is the person harmed, since he too is the person deceived. For if anyone should suppose a judgment to be false, the judgment is not harmed, but he who is deceived about it. Setting out then from this principle, you will be gentle with a person who reviles you, for you will say on each occasion, it seemed so to him. And so any initial thoughts on that, Caleb?
Well, I think it's a nice summary of, I'm sure you'll get into this, but it's a nice summary of this view of Socratic intellectualism, which is just, I suppose, fancy way of saying that the Stoics took seriously this idea that people do the best by their own lights. This is another reason why you should be careful when making judgments about other people, whether they're about that person's character or, of course, attitudes of anger in response to what others do.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it captures that, and it carries this idea that comes with that about being, as you said, non-judgmental, forgiving almost. I'll try to run through that again in plain language. So we'll do it one more time. So the first part, Epictetus says, when someone acts badly towards you or speaks badly of you, remember that he's acting or speaking in that way because he thinks that's appropriate for him to do so. All he's saying is that when someone insults you or someone says something mean or does something bad, they think this is the best thing for them. It's like in their worldview, this seems like the right thing to do. And that's a Stoic idea, right? As you were saying, that's Socratic intellectualism. It's the idea that people only ever do what they think is right. So, villains, bad guys, nobody's walking around the world thinking they're the bad guy. Nobody's walking around the world thinking they're the villain. Nobody insults somebody and thinks, I'm really mistaken about this insult, but I'm going to say it anyway. This is a really terrible thing for me to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. People insult you because they think it's right. Either they think you deserve to be insulted, they're getting revenge. Maybe they think it's right to pick on the weak people. It's kind of survival of the fittest. And if they're strong, it's okay for them to bully you. Whatever it is, people are always acting in the way they think is best. And so that's the first sentence. And so recognize that even when someone's insulting you, rude to you, mean to you, that's still what's going on. And then the second piece, Epictetus says, now it's not possible that he should follow what appears good to you. And that's all they're saying is that everybody does what they think is right for themselves. Even that's why you're disagreeing, is you both think something different is the good thing to do. Maybe in this case, it's a silly example. You think it's right not to get insulted, and you think it's right to insult you. But everybody does what they think is best. The whole world, other people, they're not going to think what you think, right? Other people aren't all going to agree with you. They're going to do what they think is best. And that's something you need to accept. It's like that Marcus Aurelius line where he says, other people, when I wake up in the morning, recognize that other people are going to feel differently about things, but they don't understand good and evil. They don't understand right from wrong like I do. People just see the world differently. Mm-hmm. And then he has this other part, if he judges wrongly, he is the person harmed, since he too is the person deceived. And so that's when Epictetus brings in empathy. And Epictetus is saying, look, people insult you because they think that's the right thing to do. But if they're incorrect, then they're actually being harmed because they're confused about the world. They're mistaken about the way things are. And that's bad for them. You don't want to be mistaken. You don't want your friends and family to be mistaken. You don't want your friends and family to go around making fools of themselves, insulting people that don't deserve to be insulted, acting poorly. So when someone is confused and they're hurling insults at you, they're in a way they're suffering too. It's like this empathetic jump where, if somebody is a bully, I'm not the victim because they're trying to bully me. In a way, they're the victim because they have to live with themselves. They have to live with this mistaken conception of the world. They have to live with this bad character.
Hmm.
Um, that's that second part.
Yeah. It's an interesting form of empathy, because sometimes when you think about that term, you think on taking on the feelings of others, of course. But I think here it means something slightly different, almost like the kind of empathy a parent might feel for a
Mm-hmm.
child who's suffering, and perhaps mistaken about the causes of their suffering. It's, I think, taking on what Epictetus says later, a gentler attitude. But it isn't, of course, it isn't just taking on experiencing the world as the other person experiences it, or something like that, or trying to get into the other person's head. It's more, understanding that, look, whatever's driving their behavior is, in a sense, the same thing that's driving your behavior, trying to do one's best, trying to come to correct judgments.
Yeah, I think it's like empathizing with the human condition, which we share with the other person, which is that
Mhm.
we're all just these little brains walking around trying to make sense of the world, and we never quite get it right. We're often confused, and it's embarrassing when we're confused, and it's painful when we're confused. And so that person, if they're insulting you incorrectly, if you don't deserve to be insulted, you didn't do something that warranted it, they're insulting you incorrectly. Um, they're hurling some sort of slur, or this just a prejudice thing, just something that you'd be like, that's just a sad thing for them to be saying. It's like, well, they're a human trying to make sense of the world, and they've gotten the world wrong, right? It's ended them up in this place where they think the best thing to do is to uh, you know call you some sort of slur or insult you for something that has no good reason or basis. And that's a kind of a sad thing because we're all trying to be happy, we're all trying to live well, and this person is failing to do that. So this person is failing to do well. And so I think the empathy, as you said, like with the child is like, I think it's, I don't think you meant it patronizingly. And I want to reiterate that I don't think it's patronizing, because I think what happens with a child is you see them as a whole person. You're like, I know you, how you were raised. I understand where you're coming from, but you're getting this wrong. And so I think you extend that empathy also to other humans, other adults, which is like, you're just another human trying to be happy, trying to live your good life. And you're failing right now, right? You've become, whether that's like, racist, sexist, other kinds of prejudice, whatever the insult is, you've kind of got things twisted. And that's a sad thing for you because you're not achieving what you want to achieve.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the paternalist example can fit sometimes, but perhaps a better analogy for most of these types of situations is the one that Seneca uses in one of his letters, where he says, "Look, I'm in the hospital bed right next to you. I have the same disease. It's just progressed a
Mm.
little bit longer, and that's probably a little bit closer to the situation where we're in with other people. It's not that large of a gap."
Yeah, we're not perfect, right? Even as I'm not perfect. I don't think you're perfect, Caleb. No offense. And so when you see someone else making a mistake, when you see someone else making a mistake here, it's the same as you said. We're in the same hospital bed, and you see them suffering, and you're like, "Ooh, ooh, that's gotta hurt." I know what that feels like, um, even if they're not realizing they're sick yet. Um, so the next part he says, for if anyone should suppose a composite judgment to be false, the composite judgment is not harmed, but he who is deceived about it. Um, which is just to say that, like, if you think something false, you didn't hurt the thought. The harm isn't to the judgment. The harm is to the thinker. The harm is to you. So something like, if I think a square is a circle, Nothing bad has happened to the square. Just you're the one who didn't understand the situation. And so if I, Caleb, if I call you all kinds of mean things that you don't deserve to be called, nothing bad has happened to you, Caleb. Only something bad has happened to me because I've been deceived. I've gotten things wrong. And that's the point of that sentence, which is just, the person who mistakes the things, the one that gets harmed, not not the one that they're mistaken about. And that's it's another way of just stepping back from this idea of insults, conflict. The Stoics have this nice way of reducing those to judgments, right? It's like
Mhm.
because so often we connect the things people say about us to our self-worth. If they insult me, I'm harmed in some way. If they think poorly about me, I'm harmed in some way. And all we're really doing is stacking up on a scale a set of judgments and a set of facts. And if you insult me and that's a judgment and that's false, nothing bad has happened to me is the Stoic line. Just something bad has happened to you because you're confused about the world. And then maybe something bad has happened to you a long time ago, and that you've become the kind of person that forms these nasty judgments, that is quick to judge, that is not very empathetic or kind. And so that's the real harm in the situation, not the mistaken judgment. That means nothing to me, right? Obviously, well, I mean, the counter by a non-Stoic is going to say, well, I don't care what somebody says about me in a vacuum. I care if it isolates me from my friend group, right? Like they're spreading rumors, or it harms my reputation at work, um, and so on and so forth. And there's something to that. The hard Stoic line again is going to be that this is um, there will be practical implications of what people think about you, but this is the Stoic distinction, is to take it back to really ultimately what matters is ourselves, and we are not harmed. Our status in a friend group might change, and that is very sad. But maybe it's sad for the friends who have all been deceived. Maybe it's sad for us too. But the Stoics are going to keep that perspective. I mean, it just depends on how hardcore you want to be in your Stoicism. There's going to be
Mhm.
practical implications, but often they're not as extreme as most people take them to be.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's an interesting argument. You sort of get the sense that Arian, who compiled this handbook, is leaving part of the argument implicit. What I mean by that is, the statement is, the composite judgment. If someone so would suppose a composite judgment to be false, the composite judgment, that idea, is not harmed, which in a sense is somewhat obvious, I suppose. Ideas can't be harmed. But then, I suppose that the thought that's perhaps is implicit is that we usually think the object of the judgment, ourselves, when we're being insulted, in this case, that's what's harmed. But your example of thinking a square is a triangle is a good one here, or thinking it's an easy case to see it where, well, look, if that judgment is just mistaken, then in what sense is the object, whoever is insulted, harmed? Of course, there are these upshots with indifference, your status in a friend group. They may also be deceived, but then the harm is located in the people who are deceived. So I suppose what's implicit here is just searching for who's harmed. It's not in the judgment. It's not in the object of the
Mhm.
judgment. It's in the people who hold it.
Yeah, it's like what's the bad thing that's happened here? Well, it's the viciousness. It's either the ignorance or the downright viciousness of the bad character that's produced the ignorance. That's the bad thing that's happened here.
Hmm.
Nothing bad has happened to you in isolation. As you pointed out, yeah, bad things can happen, or I say bad things, but things you don't prefer could happen to indifference would be the Stoic lines. Things that you'd prefer there not to be rumors about you. That's true. You can do what's in your control to stop those rumors and correct those rumors. But the only bad thing that's happened, the only true harm to any of the people involved, is the ignorance or the vicious character producing that ignorance.
Hmm. Yep.
And then the last line by Epictetus is, he says, setting out then from this principle, you'll be gentle with a person who reviles you, for you'll say on each occasion, it seemed so to him. And that's just the idea of um, don't be mad at the haters. If I'm trying to say, don't be mad at the haters because they're just because haters are going to hate, I guess is the view. But if somebody seems that way, if somebody wants to hate you, they will. And that's the way that it seems to them. And like anybody else in the world, they're going to do what seems right to them. And if they happen to be a confused, mistaken person, they are going to be acting in confused and mistaken ways. And so, again, you can intervene, you can set boundaries, you can cut off. If somebody, you can remove yourself from situations where someone's being toxic to you, bullying you, things like this. Stand up for yourself, do all these things. But while you're standing up for yourself, also forgive this person or don't hate this person
Mhm.
because they're lying in the hospital bed with the sickness, right? And that sickness is making them do nasty things. It's the thing. Epictetus has another line. I'll be paraphrasing, but it's something about we don't judge blind people for being blind when they make mistakes when they're blind. We are very kind. We're very forgiving about that because we say, well, look, you're just trying to make your way around the world, but you've got this problem where you can't see, and that leads you to make mistakes, right? And it's the same thing with I think he talks about that in a case in criminals and thieves, which is say, look, you're just trying to achieve happiness, but your distorted view of the world is leading you to do it this way. And that's sad. And I'm not gonna be mad at you. I'll try to help you if I can. I'll protect myself from you if that's necessary, but I'm not going to be mad at you. And I think that's another thing. This goes a long way to this idea of why the Stoics don't believe in anger even
Mhm.
against those who are insulting you, even against those who are trying to harm you, because ultimately that person doesn't deserve punishment from you because they're already getting punished. They're already sick in the hospital bed, as you were saying.
Yeah, that's well put. Um, I like the Robin Hard translation where you're reading from. I was also taking a look at the Robin Waterfield translation, and the way he puts this last sentence is interesting too. He says, or he translates it as, "If your inclinations to act are based on these principles, you'll be gentler with anyone who maligns you, because whenever that happens, you'll tell yourself that's what he thought it best to do." Across both, you have the same translation using gentleness, which I think is interesting, properly uniform. And then I like how he highlights the inclinations to act, because I think what Waterfield is pointing out here is your impulses, are reminding us that if you're grounded in these principles, your how you tend to behave will be in a gentler fashion.
Yeah, it's almost the way I've described it at this point is very like don't take it personally, and the way you're describing it, which I mean, I assume the word there is horme. I don't
Mm-hmm.
have the Greek in front of me, but that's talking about not just how we feel about it, but what we go out and we do in the world. What do you do when someone insults you? Do you say, "Hey, screw you too"? Do you hit them? How do you respond out in the world? And so focusing on that, on those inclinations to act says, you know, when you not only should you not be offended, but you should not go out and try to punish. You should not go out and try to hit back. You should be gentle with them because it seemed best to them. Um, I like that. I like that focus on not just yourself, but how you go out and act with the other person.
Yeah, yeah. I think another point, or did you want to add something?
Well, I was going to say it's a separate point, but another point from this is that Epictetus is using the example of insults, and I assume Roman culture is probably a pretty prideful culture. It's probably a lot of instances or somebody insulted me in public and now we have to fight about it. Now I have to get back my honor and things like this. But the hidden implication of this is that this applies for everything anybody does ever, right? That's the full implication of Socratic intellectualism. So it's not just insults. It's not just verbal harassment. It is anything anybody does. It seems best to them. And so when you should be gentle towards the person who insults you, yeah, that's a good thing to remind yourself if you're really sensitive to insults. But anything that promotes in you anger, a lack of gentleness, a desire to get back at people, I think it's important to come back to this perspective from Epictetus, this view of if this person's right, well then you deserved it. If they're wrong, then they're mistaken. If they're mistaken, then they've been harmed. If they've been harmed, they don't need the kind of anger response. They need a gentle response. They can still be corrected, they can still be helped, but they don't need to be punished further, typically. Not on a moral level, right? Maybe we have to punish people to make a point, but not on a moral level. Morally, they're already being harmed just by being a bad person.
Yeah, yeah. It's a radical view, really. So much of the focus on Stoicism is on changing your orientation towards other people, the world, and I see this focus of Stoic teaching as trying to deprogram people from responding to insults, any other kind of wrongdoing with immediate anger or immediately losing one's cool. And then there is that separate issue. Okay, now that you've can know that you can expect this kind of thing from people, now that you've internalized these principles, how you respond is still a complex matter, and to some extent a different one, but it's getting this orientation right that I think is essential for, or that the perhaps that that's the main focus of this Stoic idea, is focusing on that internal orientation, and then if once that is set, then one's inclinations to act, one's behavior will be in a better spot.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like just that reminder of again, not about yourself. It is about yourself, but it doesn't end with just being resilient. It doesn't end with just being the statue that everything bounces off of. As Epictetus says, we shouldn't be unfeeling like a statue, but we should go out and act well. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if your brother, your parents, your coworkers insult you, it's not just I'm a statue. I don't feel any of this. Nothing matters to me. It's though, okay, I hear you. I'm going to now act, but I'm going to act in a gentle way without anger towards you. That's a pretty cool disposition to develop.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
It reminds me of this. This is actually a song lyric where it goes something like, "If your old man did you wrong, well, maybe his old man did him wrong." Um, and it's just this concept of I think about the same thing as this perspective shift, right? Where you're insulted, you think about yourself. Your dad is uh, treated you bad, you think about yourself, and it's like, well, what about them? Why did they treat me bad? Well, probably because maybe they were abused by their father, maybe they were treated poorly by their father, and it's just that's what I mean by empathy, is that like next order perspective shift. And it's
Mm-hmm.
the same thing here of like, okay, he or she's insulted me. They're angry. They've done something bad to me. Well, why did they do it? Well, because it seemed best to them, and because of what's happened to them in their life has made them think this is the right way to live. This is the right way to be happy. And if they're wrong about that, that's sad. Um, and I just it's a yeah. You said shifting your perspective, shifting the way you respond to things. That's a difficult shift to maintain, but if you can, it's so much more grace in how you treat other people.
Yeah, I think a related idea here is, of course, Stoic determinism. The Stoics were determinists, so they thought whatever happens was essentially necessitated by the past, and as such, people cannot act other than the way they do. And if people believe in determinism, many people respond to that by in a similar fashion. Seeing people as this person is acting like this way because that's just how the world has been set up, because of their past experiences, because of how their character has been formed and such. And I think it's intuitive, at least for many people, to see that as a reason to be less immediately reactive, responsive, and such to other people's actions.
Yeah, it's something I try to do. I mean, this one is something that I try to
Yeah,
do,
yeah,
and I always try to that idea about determinism, that idea of look, that person could not have acted differently in the moment. maybe they could have acted differently hypothetically. Like, they obviously, most people can do a different thing in the moment, but they couldn't. But in one sense, they could have kept their mouth shut and not insulted me or not done that thing that was painful and mean. Um, but on another sense, they were who they were in that situation, responding to the stimulus they were responding to, and in that sense, they're kind of pre-built. The reaction is predetermined. Um, it's a I think some people respond to it negatively because it almost seems to take away the sense of agency, right? Um, there's this view of like, I'm mad at you because you could have done something different. If you couldn't have done something different, I wouldn't be mad at you. And I think the Stoic response to this is to say, well, your agency is in changing your character over time. Your agency is in directing yourself in the path of self improvement. But in any situation, you're only ever as good as you are. And so that person has a responsibility. It's up to them to cultivate their character over time, it's not up to them to be a different person in the moment than they are. And that both expecting people to improve and hope the best for themselves, and also meeting them where they're at, again, is another difficult balance to hold. But yeah, one that I'm working on.
Yeah, that's a good one. Something I've struggled with both Socratic intellectualism and some of these arguments about determinism is that I think you sort of have this thought: this person is doing the best they can, therefore you ought to be gentle with them. But I've sometimes wondered, does that really follow? So if the person is doing the best they can, but they have a vicious character and they're exhibiting that in their actions, I think there are separate Stoic arguments that I think mean we should be skeptical about these kinds of judgments we have about others. They have a vicious character and so on. Many of our judgments about others might be too quick. If we draw comparisons between them and ourselves, yes, we also have vicious characters, but at least in some of the obvious cases, I mean, you can say some people, they do the best they can, but they have a terrible character or something like that. So why would it follow that you ought to be gentle with them? Isn't how you should treat them determined by their character? In the same way that we explain whether a given pleasure is good or bad by how someone is experiencing it, how what situation they're in, essentially by their character. The pleasure of the sadist is bad. The pleasure that someone feels when they're creating beautiful music, that's good, and that I think that refers to, of course, facts of the situation, but also in some way grounded in their character. So that's something I've wondered about. Like, is the Socratic intellectualism, determinism? If you take this really strong sort of character type based view, that I think you can find some support in Stoicism, does both Socratic intellectualism and these arguments for more empathy because of determinism become less relevant?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm following the argument. I mean, I guess maybe I'm missing something, but I see how you should treat people. Yeah, I guess your view is that everybody should be your view, or your argument is that, look, if the determinism in Socratic intellectualism is true, then everybody deserves to be treated the exact same way, because everybody is just only ever doing the best they can, and then you're saying that doesn't seem to make sense. Some people should be treated better or worse. Good people should be treated better, and worse people should be treated better, or worse people should be treated worse. Um, and I guess in the view is that worse people are treated worse, or worse people do get what's
Mm-hmm.
coming to them. It just doesn't come from you; it comes from their own life. And better people do get treated better and do have better lives. It just doesn't come from you either. Maybe that's an answer. That's how people get what they deserve. You're just not the one to dish it out
Yeah, yeah,
necessarily.
yeah.
I just thought of that though, so I might be wrong.
I think I was sort of maybe mixing two things together, which is, and I think you've partially answered one of these concerns, which is the first is just a question. Why? What sort of grounds the move from people are doing their best to therefore you should be gentle with them? People are determined in their actions to therefore
Okay,
you should
cool.
be gentle with them. why not just say, okay, people are determined, I'm determined. You sort of have that funny story about Zeno, who's, a servant steals a shoe or something like this, and he says, the servant says, I was fated to do this, and Zeno says, I was fated to beat you with a shoe once I recovered with it, or something like that. So you have that sort of version with it, and then the second thing I was trying to say, which maybe got muddled in a bit, which is that usually when we're thinking about how to respond to insults, maybe it's dependent on someone's character, which I think is a further view, and it opens up is a decent heuristic, but I think there's probably a lot more to say there, and it's probably the first one where we can make the most progress here.
Well, is the view to be gentle with the person, is that also about yourself? So, I mean, I understand your point, which is like, if everybody's only ever doing their best, then it almost becomes like a mute point, right? Like, okay, everybody's doing their best, fine. Now, because that's built into every argument ever, that's built into every conflict ever, and then so it almost cancels each other out. And then we're back to just judging people. Well, is your best good or is your best bad? And if your best is bad, I'm going to get you. I'm going to get revenge. And if your best is good, we're going to be best buds. Like it almost cancels each other out. But I think this advice is about you, right? It's like, be gentle with them. I mean, maybe because they're already sick in the hospital bed with their ignorance and their confusion and don't want to double down, but don't become the kind of person that's angry and bitter and jaded at ignorant people in the world. That's not a good way to live.
Yeah, I think that's well put. I suppose this comes back to the idea that, look, this idea about gentleness, it's a shift in you. It's a perspective shift. That's what's demanded. And then what comes next, it should be grounded in that attitude. And it can maybe takes, and what you do next depends on, demands of justice, demands of compassion, and so on. But just because someone's determined, just because someone's doing their best, doesn't mean that everyone should be treated equally. Or that's where these questions about, what should Zeno do when his servant steals his shoe come into play. And these sort of questions about fate and determinism sort of drop out, and you need to pay attention to the concrete situation.
Yeah, I think that's worth reiterating. So the idea, if somebody steals your shoe, there's the question of what kind of disposition should you have to thieves. And the Stoic response is have a gentle disposition, at least in terms of how you judge them and think about them. But then maybe that's a separate question to, okay, now, as you were saying, what does justice demand? How practically do I go about punishing them? So but there's this kind of disposition, this emotional reflex, that is to be a gentle one. And then there's this logistical, practical, cultural, contextual question of what punishment is deserved. And if we can separate those, I can still punish somebody while having a gentle disposition. I mean, we talk about this all the time in our episodes about anger and forgiveness, but think about the Seneca example of, you cannot hate a child and punish them. You cannot hate a child and scream at them, because if what they need from a parent is to be punished and to be screamed at, then your role demands that, even if you're not angry on the inside. Maybe it's the same kind of thing here. Yeah,
I think that's well put. Awesome. Did you have any other upshots you wanted to take away from this passage?
No, I mean, I just think that's a great, lots of great ideas there. I'd like to read it one last time before we finish.
Let's do it.
So now with that context in mind, all that we've talked about, we'll do it one more time. So Epictetus says again, Handbook 42, when someone acts badly towards you or speaks badly of you, remember that he is acting or speaking in that way because he thinks it is appropriate for him to do so. Now, it's not possible that he should follow what appears good to you, but rather what appears so to him, so that if he judges wrongly, he is the person harmed, since he too is the person deceived. For if anyone should suppose a composite judgment to be false, the composite judgment is not harmed, but he who is deceived about it. Setting out then from this principle, you will be gentle with a person who reviles you, for you will say on each occasion, it seemed so to him.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Caleb.
Thanks for listening to Stoic Conversations. Please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and share it with a friend. If you want to dive deeper still, search Stoa in the App Store or Play Store for a complete app with routines, meditations, and lessons designed to help people become more stoic. And I'd also like to thank Michael Levy for graciously letting us use his music. You can find more of his work at ancientlyre.com. And finally, please get in touch with us. Send a message to stoa@stoameditation.com if you ever have any feedback, questions, or recommendations. Until next time.